Where were you on January 28th, 1986? Welcome to Wolf's Watch. I'm Wolf. Today, got a special edition. Was prepping a show about scaling and constraints in scaling a business based on lessons learned in being involved in launch system developments in the late 1990s. But today is a special day because in January 28th, 1986, many people in America, the world, were looking up in absolute horror at the sky because Space Shuttle Challenger experienced what we call an anomaly in that industry. And hey, Echo, thanks for joining us. This is live. Thanks for being part of the conversation. If you got questions, comments, please share them with us, because this is an interactive, right? This is 21st century television, live, interactive. You can hear the construction going on. Perhaps there's some expansion. The sounds of progress. Hear that? The sounds of progress as some of the folks around us are building out, upgrading, expanding. But coming back to January 28th, 1986, Space Shuttle Challenger suffered an anomaly 83 seconds in. 73 seconds into the launch in what would otherwise be known as an explosion. We watched the shuttle blow up. Where were you when that happened? I mean, that's a defining moment. It's one of those moments in life where you probably know where you were at when you heard about it the first time that day. If you're old enough, if you were not, if it was before your time, or perhaps young enough, it just wasn't something to be paying attention to. I was at Hughes Aircraft Company at the time, Hughes Aircraft Corporation, and a colleague of mine and I had been asked to give do a training for the systems engineering lab at electro-optical and data systems group, as it was called at the time, in El Segundo, California. And no one showed up. You hear a lot of speakers, presenters. Think about that. It seems to be one of maybe a top five as you arrive at an empty room. We had a captive audience, 60 plus people were going to be there for the lab. And as we were packing up our training materials, someone stuck their head in and said, "Hey, did you hear?" And told us what had happened. And we're like, our first reaction, we looked at each other. Tony Soria. Tony, if you're out there, still appreciate the work that we did so far back in the day, being part of that team. We looked at each other and almost in unison went, "That's not funny." And just shaking his head, no. You need to report back, to your team. The whole company's in shock, which they were. There a lot of lives were lost that day. The whole crew didn't make it, unfortunately. And it's one of the things that happens. There's a scaling lesson in there, as unfortunate as that was, not to take away from the tragedy, the memories of the astronauts that were part of that. There's still some lessons that can be learned that are relevant to scale. The shuttle program was scaling up at a massive rate at that point. It was going to be the most launches they'd had in a year. They'd planned on doing a couple from the West Coast at Vandenberg. We were able to hear the landings when they came into Edwards Air Force Base. We used to go outside, and it was just a thing. It still gives me chills at times to think about it, because we talked about it being the first real spaceport. We knew when the shuttle lanes were coming in. Communications for a shuttle landing shuttle was coming through our facility, through our campus at the time. And we would go outside, in beautiful Southern California day, and you hear, boom, feel it in your chest, boom. The double, it was double explosion from breaking a sound barrier, decelerating as the shuttle re-entered the atmosphere. You could hear and feel the sonic booms as the shuttle decelerated before landing at Edwards Air Force Base in the desert northeast of Los Angeles. It was exciting times. In Hughes Aircraft had a team member on the shuttle. Dr. Jarvis had an engineering degree. Greg Jarvis was a payload specialist. He was on that flight. He'd been bumped twice um, to that flight because VIPs were being flown, members of Congress who had a hand in funding for NASA. And it's not a dig, it's not a commentary, it's just priorities. Sometimes schedules change, things are fluid in a situation like that. And he was going up to be part of a satellite deployment as a payload specialist, and also to get firsthand experience on what happens, particularly in fluid motions, as I understood it, within the satellites. And something went wrong. There was a congressional investigation and a lot done on that. You can refer to that in terms of what happened. But that day I had lunch with some of Greg Jarvis's colleagues that worked directly with him. They were part of the same team. They had worked together for years, and we had lunch together that day, and they were just devastated. They'd been watching live because that campus managed communications. I would say we, because I was very proud to be part of the Hughes Aircraft team, the larger team, and at that particular facility, which is now has since become part of Boeing and Raytheon. That campus is has two different companies that bought different parts of that business unit from Hughes Aircraft, Raytheon, and Boeing. However, in those days, it was all Hughes Aircraft, and communications was managed through that facility, part of the communications through that campus in El Segundo, even though they were launching. So this is early virtual work. Imagine that. They're launching from Florida. Houston, as we all know, Houston, we have a problem of the famous saying that's become part of our culture, part of our language, was the primary mission control. And we had communication in California. As a matter of fact, once a work crew that was unrelated to anything that was happening in aerospace or the launches accidentally cut through a telephone cable and communications trunk, as we called them, in a big tube. They had a bunch of different communications wires, telephone, dedicated lines running through it, cut through it, and shuttle launch had to be canceled and rescheduled because it impacted the ability to run all the telemetry and whatnot. So early days of remote work. Coming back to, I had this up for your perusal in terms of what was said, just from, if you do a quick search on Greg Jarvis, there's a little background on him. And I didn't know Dr. Jarvis personally. One of the gentlemen I had lunch with, I had gotten to know. That was why I had the honor of having lunch with them that day. And as Echo points out, the O-rings in the solid rockets were given the blame for that. But here's some other things, and this was talked about the day of. One of the concerns the day of at lunch, so this is, within hours of this tragedy happening, at lunch, Dr. Jarvis's colleagues were talking about how the schedule had been pushed. So this is something, as you're scaling your business, right? We look for what are the lessons. Let me take a step back. We're going to come back to that point. Here's one of the things that happens. You think about it: automobile safety, flight safety in aircraft, launch systems safety, right? Industrial safety. A lot of the things that we've learned, things that we do today that are second nature, that we think, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you wear a seatbelt in a car, right? Why wouldn't you wear a hard hat in a construction zone? Those types of things, flight check for pilots, maintenance schedules for aircraft. Those were developed because a lot of it in advance, but there were things that were learned because of tragedies, and there were lessons that were gained from the investigations of those tragedies in order to create, adjustments to rules to say, hey, you know what? This happened. It wasn't anticipated. Sometimes somebody screws up. Sometimes we learn because we can't foresee what we don't know. What we don't know what we don't know, right? The unconscious incompetence, as it's also called. Uh, and in this case, with the Challenger, the conversation that these folks, and they were involved with the flight, they were involved with satellites and deployment and whatnot, so they had some knowledge. Personally, I did not. So this was just in the conversation that we had at lunch. I was what we called manufacturing cat, and was part of the manufacturing organization for other products, and wasn't involved in that. In terms of my work there, my job there, having lunch with a couple of people that did and worked directly with Greg Jarvis. What they talked about was, because the schedule was expanding so fast, decisions needed to be made about how to maintain that pace of flight, that pace of launch. They had never done it before. And coming back to the O-rings, as Echo had pointed out, there had been an engineering, that flight had been delayed. It was jeopardizing schedule. Engineering had said it's too cold to launch, wait until later in the day or reschedule for another day. Now, launching is very complicated. There's a lot of moving parts. There's certain atmospheric things that have to happen. There's certain times when it's easier to launch, takes less fuel, so there's locations, a lot of complicated things go into that. So it's a very difficult decision to make, to go, look, can we push that time? It was cold. There was concern that the O-rings that ultimately were blamed for the tragedy failed because they were brittle, because it was too cold. There was a management decision. Now they had no way of knowing this was going to be the result. Engineering said, look, it's cold. We're below the spec, the temperature spec on the O-rings. Don't launch. There was a management decision to say, you know what, we need to stay on track with our schedule. We're going to go ahead and launch anyway. They assessed all the information that they had. I want to be very clear about this. It wasn't a nefarious decision. Based on the information they had, there was a management decision to go ahead and launch. The results we know now were disastrous. Morton Thiokol, which manufactured the O-rings, and to the best of my understanding, they were performing to spec, performing to what they've been asked to design. However, since that was considered to be the failure point, even though it was launched at a temperature below what the O-rings had been designed to operate at, Morton Thiokol got basically put out of business as a result of that, because they carried the weight of the O-ring failure. Here's the lesson. Here's the point that I want to make out of this massive tragedy. They're scaling the launch program for the shuttle. Excuse me. It's something that mankind had never done, right? In our spaceflight history, especially in the 1980s, this was 35 years ago, 36 years ago. So, in the 1980s, we had never launched so many vehicles of the same type, the reusable launcher. They'd never done so many. They had a fleet of, want to be careful about this because it's a very emotional issue. So they're scaling, launching more than ever, launching more locations than ever. So that, they wanted to open up the Vandenberg Air Force Base site in California, as another launch location. They had 2 landing locations, one in California, as I'd mentioned earlier. So they go ahead and there's disastrous results because of a potential technical issue, but hadn't been proven. And I said, based on the information they had, there's a management decision. The project manager responsible for making the call on whether to launch or not said, no, let's go ahead and launch, against the advice of engineering team. Where are you making decisions like that in scaling your business? Now, when we're talking about scaling your business, we're not talking about growth, growth 10, 15, 20%. We're talking about taking your business to an order of magnitude larger, which is what the shuttle program was experiencing. An order of magnitude more launches than they had at the beginning of the program, which was still relatively new in 1986. We've been flying for well less than 10 years. And what constraints are there in that? Well, for the shuttle, one of the constraints was the temperature, right? For the weather. Was it cold? Is it windy? Do you have clouds? You know, is it too hot? There's boundaries that are hard boundaries that haven't been explored yet, right? We know when you're growing your business, you've got some boundaries on what you can do. And let's talk specifically operations. There's some boundaries on what you can do in operations. You know about where that line is, where you can't deliver because you no longer have capacity, where you can't maintain the environment that you want for your team, the work environment, the culture, where you are looking at, well, do we say yes or no? Is that going to violate our values? Do we say yes or no on something in expanding operations because it will support or drive us off mission? Where is that? In the shuttle launch, in the Challenger disaster, they had a challenge of what are their values? What is their larger mission in terms of having a reusable, almost like commercial airplane, something that's becoming normal as opposed to, oh, because that time is still, wow, there's a shuttle launch, or there's a shuttle landing. It was something that was so unique that we that there was really hey, stop what you're doing and pay and watch this on TV, or if you can go outside like we did, if we can go outside and listen to the sonic booms as the shuttle's returning to Earth from another mission, where they were trying to create that, and they had that tension of where do they go, and there was a massive misstep and lives were lost, and a lot of times that's how safety protocols get put in place. A lot of times that's how don't do this. We know not to do this. This is a hard limit. Need to stay with are learned because in transportation, in this case with the shuttle, with cars, with airplanes, a lot of this is what we need to do in order to have safe experiences, safe flight, have been the result of tragedies where lives were lost. Now, that isn't necessarily as severe for your business, but it can be lost dollars. It can be lost team members. And the war for talent is still raging. You can lose key people because of a values violation in order to expand, in order to get stuff out the door, in order to fulfill customer expectations and continue. Because that pressure as you're scaling, you're going to run into boundaries like that. Can you bring the hard part is bringing into business. Second hardest part's delivering on the business. Once you got it, if you brought in 5 times as much business next month, could you deliver on it? I'd be willing to say probably not. That's a big chunk more, or 10 times, whatever that limit is, right? There's a certain amount of capacity that you can deliver on in excellence, consistent with the values that you want to have, that doesn't become destructive to the culture that you're building within your company, which is part of the customer experience as well. See, NASA ran into a problem with that in making the call on launching the space shuttle in 1986. And this isn't to reopen old wounds, or it's just to point fingers, to saying there was a bad call there. So leave that and come back to, how do you apply that in your business? How do you make sure you can scale your business and maintain so that you're staying, who are you listening to? Who are your advisors? Who's the equivalent of your engineers in your business? The equivalent to the engineers that were advising NASA on whether it was, from a technical standpoint, safe to launch or not safe to launch. How good are they at communicating that? How good are you at listening to them and understanding what they're saying, right? A major contributor to the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster on January 28th, 1986, was a communication problem. You have engineering specialists that are saying, we can have, this is not safe because of the temperature. O-rings are a risk. How much of a risk? How was that communicated? How well was the leadership on the other side listening when they received that message? There was part of what happened was a communication error there. There's a whole bunch of finger pointing and a big investigation and mess afterwards. That's not the point. The point is for you as the leader of your business, who do you have as advisors as you're scaling up? How well are you listening to them? How clear are you on what they are saying? And it doesn't necessarily, not saying, when scaling, a lot of times you have to make decisions fast. Right? So moving at the speed of business, moving at the pace of opportunity, moving at the pace of customer expectations. Sometimes taking a deep breath and asking one or two questions and taking an extra 30 seconds to 5 minutes can make the difference between making an egregious decision that you'll later regret or making a very good decision that's consistent with your mission, your values, your culture, and your customers' expectations and experience. It's just sometimes take that breath, slow down, make sure you are, because it comes down to you. In business, as an entrepreneur, as an entrepreneurial leader, you've built your business to a point where it's substantial, right? 15, 20 employees, 50 employees, somewhere between 5 million, 15, 20 million in sales. It's a lot of moving parts, a lot of decisions. Who's advising you? How much do you trust that? How would you listen to that and incorporate it in order to be able to make quick discernments of going, yeah, let's go ahead. You're on solid ground. Or going, you know what? This could be a challenger moment in terms of deciding whether or not to go ahead with that step or not. So just have some more lessons on from the launch systems industry coming up on Monday. And I was going to do that today, and I was going, no, you know what? Today's January 28th. I want to have this conversations with you today, and we'll talk some more about some experience because, I was at Hughes Aircraft in 1986 when this happened. Was honored to be able to have lunch with people that were directly involved with the launch operations, but also, with distinguished member of the crew, Greg Jarvis. Wish I'd had the opportunity to get to know him. Sounded like a pretty good guy, as with the rest of the crew. And who do you listen to? What do you do when your equivalent of engineering is telling you, you know what? It's too cold. We may have a problem. No one knew for certain what was going to happen when the shuttle was launched. They hadn't done it before. Hadn't worked at that aggressive of a schedule before, right? They're scaling up. And to delay it would have had a big impact on that scaling. On the program for scaling that year makes it harder. Either you don't, it puts you in a position where either you don't scale or you need to pack more in faster to get it done in the same amount of time, right? Not a good position to be in either. So when your equivalent of your engineering team is telling you that, going, hey, we've got a risk here. How are you assessing that risk in order to make sure that you don't end up with a Challenger disaster of your own? And again, not to make light of the Challenger disaster. I wanted to do a straight tribute, but there's always lessons, right? Tragedies happen. It's not about fault. It's about understanding what we can learn from that and what we can do different by applying those lessons down the road. I want to see you scale your business, which means get to that next level, right? How do you scale up to 100 million? How do you go 5 times, 10 times bigger, an order of magnitude bigger, add a zero onto what you're doing? Who do you need to advise you, not specific individuals, or at least what type of information you need in order to be able to make that happen? How does your role change as the leader of your company? How does that match with your skill set? We'll talk some more about that when we talk about launch system development. This was 1986. 11 years later, I was working at McDonnell Douglas and was involved with launch system development and new launch systems. And we'll talk about that on Monday. There's a couple key lessons there that'll help you with scaling your business, which is really what it's all about. So thanks for joining me for Wolf's Watch. Even though it's a somber day, somber episode, there's always good that can come with it if we learn lessons that make the world better going forward, right? So hope you're having an awesome Friday. Have a fabulous Friday. Not just an awesome Friday. Have a fabulous Friday. And hopefully, some time to reflect over the weekend to recreate. That's why they call it recreation. And I will see you on the next Wolf's Watch. This is the 146th episode of Wolf's Watch, and I want to thank you for being part of it. Again, this is a two-way conversation. Echo, thanks for having comments and questions. Appreciate you being part of it. Yeah. All right. Epic. Yes. Yes, indeed. So again, this is 21st century television. It's live and interactive. Glad you're part of it. Keep your comments, your questions coming in. If you comment after the show, if you're watching this on a replay, go ahead and comment. We get notifications and we watch that and still like to interact, like to hear from you, ask questions. If there's something you want to hear, topic you want to dive into deeper, if something that I said you think is wrong and I'm all wet, I want to hear your opinion. Why? Don't just squawk at me, right? Haters got to hate. It's not what we're talking about. Say, hey, you know what? That was wrong. Here's why. If you got a fact update where I got a fact wrong that I quoted, let me know so that we can update that and we can publish a correction and update it so we can keep the conversations going. This is all conversations about scaling your business in 2022. A lot of opportunity. It's going to be another turbulent year, like we've been saying. It's going to through 2022 because it's an election year. Not just because of that. There's a lot of other things happening, but that tax on to the chaos that we've carried from 2020 into 2021 and now into 2022, just to keep it more interesting, right? Okay, I'm Wolf. Thanks for being part of Wolf's Watch, and I will see you on the trail.